We speak our words, we listen.
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 Here we are again. Lots of different people try lots of different ways of communicating the idea of autism out to the world. Welcome again to Autistic Radio. It's Jules. I'm speaking with Timm. There's a difference between us as well as a big similarity. The similarity, I think you're all going to guess, and it's going to be obvious, is that we are both autistic. The difference is I am less experienced in my knowledge of my autism and the amount of time I've had to even recognize and understand it. But there is somebody who has a lot more information than me about it. So it's a pleasure to be speaking to Timm today, somebody I follow on LinkedIn. When I read what's written, I find it to be insightful, something that makes me go away and think about it. Is that okay if I blow smoke up your arse here, Karen?
Certainly. Thank you for that. I'm humbled by your words. I think we're all on our own journey. I remember newly understanding and coming to terms with being autistic several years ago and learning from people like Lyric Holmans, who at the time was Krista Holmans. They've changed their name a wee bit and now is Lyric Rivera. I came across their work online. They go by Neurodivergent Rebel, and they're quite a bit younger than me. Because of the sharing of their stories and their own understanding, it was extremely powerful. I was experiencing a real awakening. You still don't diminish your own story. You are where you are in your journey. We all have opportunities to learn from each other. That's part of it, right? It's important that we not minimize our own lived experience.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm not trying to minimize. I'm trying to doff my hat and show respect. I'm really comfortable with where I am. But the other thing is, I can come across as a bit of an arse. I'm a white privileged male, who hasn't had to mask that much, hasn't had to accumulate a lot of trauma. I have to be really careful that my outward confidence doesn't come across to other people as a difficulty. I mean, can you have any sympathy with somebody as privileged as me?
Yeah. No, but I think that's interesting because even in that, it's masking, right? You're having to translate the world to how you would be seen and soften the approach, right? That's very interesting. We all present very uniquely, men, women, non-binary folks, et cetera, around the world. In my experience, women are often seen as too much or too intense or it's always prefaced with to something, right? And even as children, that happens early, way before people know that they're autistic. Little girls are the people pleasers or the overly dramatic or the too emotional or the this or that, labeled in so many ways, way before we encounter a diagnostic process for those who even have the privilege to do so.
It sounds to me as what you're saying is this is a misogynistic world in which women have to adapt whether they are autistic or not, and the standards by which women are held to happens right back in the family. Mothers and fathers do it, and it's an extra layer when that person is also autistic. Have I understood?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. being in education, I've witnessed many little girls in particular who, as they enter the school system, they come in as close to their authentic self as they can be. Then they spend their primary years into their preteen and teen years developing who they are, but it's all geared to who they think they're supposed to be. They're already kind of themselves, and then they have to change who they are. And I say have to, I mean, it is survival in many ways because so much of what we have to do is driving to fit in, even though later on we come back to the need to not fit in. So I think many of us go through ups and downs of what degree do we want to fit in. When we think about autistic masking, we know that it's conscious, but also very unconscious or subconscious. And there's so many layers to this, not just for women, for men and women, right from our earliest socializations. I always think back to the example of eye contact. In many cultures, eye contact is considered respect. It's how we communicate, quote, normally by making eye contact. And those early indicators in many cultures of a baby connecting with their family is this eye gaze. And lots of autistics still do that. But if you think about the reinforcement that we get as little humans, as infants, every time we're looking at making eye contact with new people, right? It's the oohing and the awing and the positive reinforcement. That's reinforcing a masking response if that eye gaze or looking at somebody new to you in the eyes doesn't feel comfortable. It's layers and layers of masking. Many of us are, if not all of us, are on a perpetual journey throughout our lives to figure out how much of us is the mask and how much of it is not.
Hmm. I fully agree with you. You could describe what I did to hold up and say, look, I am privileged and I am being careful. I am being careful to be considerate. I am being careful to be polite. I'm being careful in that way to kind of demonstrate my knowledge, to say, look, you're safe here. I've thought about it. I know. I know. You know. To me, that felt that I was doing that intellectually. It didn't feel like a mask because in the end, without sounding rude, I could walk away at any time. I do feel that privileged. I do not feel as though somebody has any right over me to ask me to look in their eyes. I do look in people's eyes because I'm interested sometimes, because I want to see what's going on with them, whether their pupils are moving or I want to see little different micro expressions. But I am very aware that the majority of the time I do not give people eye gaze, and I do not expect them to request it from me. If they request it from me, I see that as an aggression. So this is why I kind of try to put across this feeling that I have, is that I've got away with it very easily. I come from neurodivergent parents, and I have never really been forced to act according to social mores, but I have looked around me and decided what is useful for me. So maybe that's masking, or maybe that's just being a bit canny. I don't know how to judge that for myself. What I do know is I don't feel I'm in any harm from this, but other people are, aren't
Yeah, well, I mean, and the thing is, uh, I think it's how we decide whether we're harmed or not, right? So what somebody may feel is them being harmed, somebody else may not feel that that's them being harmed, right? But I too, although my parents were never diagnosed with anything. We're all in agreement that I too am from a neurodivergent family, parents and likely grandparents, aunts, uncles, you name it. I was very fortunate. Some of my privilege also, shared with you, being a white presenting human, English speaking in an English speaking country. It was never forced upon me either. We just kind of got each other. There are nuances and things that we joke about now, right? Like that we now recognize they seemed just normal to us, but they wouldn't necessarily be things that were considered normal in non-autistic families. I didn't feel those pressures. However, in a school setting or workplace setting, even to this day, in the last little while, I've had conversations with superiors about eye contact. When we're doing sessions to teach teachers how to communicate or teach leaders how to communicate with each other, we should not be defaulting to saying that making good eye contact is an expectation, and that if you don't do that, then you are not communicating well with families, because the assumption is that this is how they want to be received. That's not the case for many families. They don't want eye contact. Neurodivergence, sensory reasons. It could be for cultural or faith-based reasons, right? We know there are many faiths and cultures where eye contact is not something that is automatically equated with respect or good communication. When I am open about the fact that eye contact feels gross in some circumstances for me, I'm capable of doing it. Absolutely. What I advocate for is for us to not assume those neuronormative standards are the best way of doing things, that we shouldn't make blanket statements about what does good communication look like? What does good listening look like? What does good whatever look like? Yes, harms are caused in job interviews. It happens in the workplace when people are doing appraisals of you. It happens when you disclose things about yourself that maybe you have masked for a very long time, and people might say that's successful, quote quotes. But when you're expending inordinate amounts of energy to do those things, and they're actually not beneficial for everyone, then you're losing out on other things you could be using that energy for, right? That may not hit you until you get home from a long day's work or a commute, a day attending appointments or what have you. Maybe people don't see how it hits you, but it does hit you. You only have so much energy, or some of us will say spoons, to expend throughout a day.
Yeah, kind of social battery theory. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. Social battery is another good way of putting it, for sure.
It's lovely to hear that you're in the education system and you're advocating there. You're advocating early on. It seems to me that it's the education system that, when people talk to me a lot about this, is when it's the part of their lives that they are able to hone in on and say that these are the incidents, these are the things that I remember that I had to deal with. But it also is the case that that is also the time of the age of them. They didn't have a choice. Everyone was put through the education system at the same time. So there's a coincidence in it. Is the education system actually designed to make us neuronormative behaving? Is it the whole idea of it, from its first principles, to get the kids to behave in a useful way for them to then be the cannon fodder for the army or for the workplace or for the industrialized world, because we only really started educating kids when they had left the farms and when they were moving into the towns and cities, you know? Is that the truth?
Yeah, I mean, I remember discussing this with somebody else. The education system, if you look to some of the oldest ones, the traditional system, certainly North America, but I think also in UK, we're not looking at an ageless system in comparison to the existence of the human brain and human species that is in its infancy. It feels like it's been around forever, but it really hasn't. It was developed to, you know, create, to, you know, affirm aspects of culture, strengthening ideals, whether that be faith-based generally across the world. There's lots of different ways of experiencing the world, but it's to reinforce the majority wherever that is. And in an industrialized society, in a capitalistic society, the workforce is created and tiered based on levels of education, right? And those that traditionally go through the most education, meritocracy, for lack of a better term, they're rewarded, right, with the better jobs, better pay, awards, and accolades. It's not geared to meet the needs of different kinds of learners. And when I say different, I mean everyone has different ways of learning and receiving information. It's geared to what's still considered a majority population, even today. It takes a long time for change. It's very hard to be patient waiting for that change to happen. So, what we're seeing now is a lot of people, as they're telling their stories and sharing their realities and their reflections, their experiences in education, both young and current students, those who have graduated and those who went through the education system even decades ago, we're seeing more and more educators wanting to change things, recognizing that it's almost impossible to wait for policies and processes and procedures to take hold before you make change. A lot of educators are looking for new and innovative ways to meet the needs of diverse learners. For one, it's survival for them because it's almost impossible to teach in traditional system and meet the needs of learners and not have all kinds of challenges when you're overstimulating sensorially learners. There will be conflicts, there will be meltdowns, there will be really unfortunate circumstances because the needs of so many learners are not being met. Kids ostracizing each other, those that are seen as the norm, are in power. There's a lot of power and privilege, and education is like a microcosm of society. We're not getting kids ready for the real world. Schools are the real world. What we do in schools has a lot more ripples creating society than we realize. And when we create innovative schools where kids can feel like they can be themselves, they're the ones going to be changing things sustainably.
Okay, I want to try and say this back to you in a simple way and see if it gets there, right? Schools are new according to the length of time we have been teaching each other and passing on information from one generation to another. They were set up when there was an industrialized society. At the beginning, they mostly just passed on the religion and the culture of the people. Children were taken into a place when they could no longer work alongside their parents in the factories and the mills, and they were taken away and looked after by people who then enforced a certain set of standards. And gradually, we hope educational reforms into a way of skilling our workforce and giving a meritocracy or competition-based system with exams and ways of grading people so that we could pick out the people who were going to have the biggest opportunities and were going to get the possibilities in society. And that's how it's worked fairly well over the last hundreds of years or so. But you're saying the educationalists themselves now, possibly only during the last 50, maybe even down to the last 30, maybe even only the last 10 years, are trying from within change the system and change the way things are done, because they can't wait for the top down to reach them. They have to do it with their own gut feeling about how we adapt to children rather than make children adapt to everyone else and just enforce the modern society's rules on them. Is that vaguely where we are?
I ended with the idea of power and privilege. Education is a system, and systems are created through power and privilege. If the ideals of that system are to select those who are considered the best on a scale of 1 to 10, who's considered the best, who's got the highest marks, who's got this or that, then it just continues to reinforce this notion or this gold standard human. But the diversity of humans, the diversity of human thought and experiences and how we receive and process information over an entire species, it's not one kind of person that is some ideal. In order for a species to flourish and thrive, we need to be cross-pollinating. We need to be learning from each other. We need to be sharing ideas and seeing things in different ways. What's happening is, out of necessity, to try and meet the needs of diverse learners that are presenting in our classrooms. They've always been there in previous generations, and there still are a lot of isolation. There was a lot of exclusion. There was a lot of, really eugenics-based thinking, to be strong-worded about it. But we're far from where we need to be in terms of trying to be more inclusive in our schools. Once we start to get more neurodivergent people being open and recognizing their own neurodivergence as educators, and we get neurodivergent educators into more leadership positions, that's where we see this cross-pollination of ideas becoming positive moves, embracing neurodiversity and meeting the needs and implementing universal design for learning. There's a lot of talk in education, as there are in all systems, politicians and all the talk that happens there. It's really not much different. We know that kids, as well as adults, but kids do best when they feel heard, seen, valued, represented, when they go to school, but when they see themselves represented in the people educating them. It doesn't mean that every educator needs to be the same as their student. We're all unique humans. It's amazing when you see the change in a child when they hear their teacher is openly neurodivergent or their administrator is openly neurodivergent, when they are embracing their identity because they don't feel like they're quote different. They feel like they belong, right? Like they have found community, and that's so extremely powerful. There's a lot of things happening in education today.
The phrase is, you can't be what you can't see, isn't it? Look, it's wonderful hearing what you're saying and hearing the amount of knowledge and care and thought that you're putting into this is affecting me. It touches me. But there's this big weighted pendulum that I see swinging through society. And it is about enforcing constructed norms across society. So, just south of you, I read that the new administration in the United States is looking to de-woke school, to remove progressive ideas from schools by putting them under pressure in various ways. They have been doing it in the lower ends of schools by making it impossible for diversity to be in books in certain areas. So what I see in America, I also feel is happening almost everywhere else that I am. This right-wing, almost fascist version of the world, because people have looked to that for certainty. And this idea of diversity, this diversity of which I am part of, just as I get to the point where enough of people like you have done enough of the groundwork, it looks as though all the doors are going to be slammed in our faces. This is my fear.
It's hard. I try not to get too political in these things, but I think that the reality is, again, it's about power and privilege.
It's all politics, Karen. It is all politics. This is people. It's the politics, you know.
But I think what people neglect to realize is that in a certain politician's quest to be this supreme leader, his story was one of being dehumanized and made to feel less than for a very long time. There's more than enough information out there to illustrate that this person of whom we speak is extremely neurodivergent and does everything he can to suppress any indication of labels for X, Y, or Z, not just for himself, but also for his child, um, which there have been speculations about. And that's nobody's business, and I get that. But when you're a public figure, you come under scrutiny. I think what's so unfortunate is that when we have somebody who has internalized so much ableism, learned that you have to be creative, innovative, and all of those things, but the reality is it's still ruthlessness. It's still about trying to be the best, but at all costs. So it's a compensatory strategy. That's where we go wrong, because the privilege and power compiled with the ableism causes these things, causes so much harm to the person, but also to whoever they impact. When you add the privilege and power to that, it's a very dangerous combination, right? Somebody who could do all kinds of great things ends up causing a great deal of harm. And even the term woke and de-woke, it's all ridiculous. We have a diverse population of human beings, and we have to be responsive. It's incumbent upon us to be responsive to a diverse population. And anyone that is trying to neglect the needs of a diverse population is using their power and privilege to perpetuate normality. And there is no such thing as normal. It's really sad, and it's very scary. Many Canadians do not want to go down to the States. I remember receiving the news the first time this happened, and I openly wept in the school office with other educators because we were just so like dumbfounded that this election went the way that it did the first time around. We're a bit removed from it because we're in Canada, but yes, it does have implications across the world.
I
Yeah.
want to pull you out of this fire. One of my roles here is to push some pretty uncomfortable questions out there, not to hurt people, but to give us the opportunity to answer them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the advocates that we're speaking with at the moment, he calls it the Socratic principle. Bringing people to conclusions by asking them the questions, not telling them the answers. I too had a reaction. I can't say I've had the reaction recently. Shortly after the end of the first term, it was my belief that he would get the second term anyway. I saw
Right.
the second president as fairly short term, not different enough, not grasping the problems that had led us. Populism was more powerful than ideas. However, that's a democracy with 25% of the people voting, because there's a large group of people that either didn't vote, couldn't vote, or voted in a different way. So the knowledge we have of neurodiversity in this case, or any other embracing difference in human beings, the genie is out of the bottle. We need to just keep disseminating the information through the society, however the pendulum stands at the moment, and things will get tough, things will get sticky, and then they will unfold, fall apart. We need to make sure that the ideas keep moving in the background, and that we keep helping each other in the background and spreading some peace and love throughout the world. I think we must take a step back from our emotions and not be bullied by what looks like extreme power, because it isn't in the end extreme power.
Right.
We are the people, and our knowledge and our understanding of ourselves and our feelings of ourselves and our embracing of other people and the connections we make with other people are always more important than the systems. So you could see that through communism. You can see this through this quasi-fascism that we're under at the moment. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. Very much a believer in the idea of bridging, redefining community. Along the lines of what you're saying, a lot of the work that I do is international for that very reason, because working within the local community, that's great. You can help lots of people in the local community. You can't shift thinking, you can't cross-pollinate and have the impact if you are not connected with a broader matrix. Early on in my journey to understand where we need to go next and what had been done in the past and what's the knowledge base, I first learned from some of the top autistics through research or taking training courses, finding out who were the people to learn from when it came to things like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and creating and adding to this international matrix. From there, like I attribute anything that I do to a we, because I carry with me all of the learnings from my communications, from my collaborations, from early on hosting Twitter spaces together and meeting that way for the first time. I mean, I spearheaded an international summit this way. I guess it's now about almost 3 years ago. It was literally through these connections, trying to amplify, bring more people together. Those relationships are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than many of the connections many of us have in our local spaces. We're only a WhatsApp message away. It's quite amazing to see. Many of us have written books this way, started foundations this way. That's where the redefining of this knowledge base is happening. Very affirming and also hopeful. Being witness to the change in the knowledge base. If you were to look up the word autism 10 years ago to 7 or 8 to 5 years, the change now that we're seeing is we're at this tipping point. And whether we've hit it or not, I don't know. I think it's going to continue to fluctuate. It used to be impossible to find research by autistics, not because there wasn't research being done by autistics, but just because we didn't know who the autistic researchers were. And now we're seeing so many of us getting into changing the knowledge base intentionally. Many of us are in graduate studies now, not because we need to be, because we want to contribute to the narrative in ways that are considered validated. You have to do this through academia, right? Even children's picture books. Just about 3, maybe 4 years ago, when I had been open about being diagnosed, I was already many years into my career as a school leader. And somebody had asked me to do a guest reading their school online. And the book they'd selected for me was a book that, and I won't say its name, but it was a book that was well known. It's a children's book. I didn't like the book necessarily. It had what many would believe to be a positive message. But when you dig deeper, it wasn't written by an autistic. It didn't speak to me. I went looking for a book that spoke to me, that told my story so that I could feel more authentic in that. And I couldn't find one. So that night, I wrote a picture book. I was then convinced, oh, you got to publish this and what have you. That is still in the works. It can be a slow process when you're trying to stay true to your authentic story. But now, if you are an autistic child or a family of an autistic and you're looking for picture books or you're looking for, personal narratives by autistics, there's so many. And it's so much easier to find representation that way. It's brilliant the way that I think we're hitting academia and we're hitting the media where there are more representative. They're not all really great, but we're seeing autistic actors playing autistic characters, right? Which we didn't used to see. We used to only see this terrible single narrative, right? The stories that are being told, the research there. With all of those things, we broaden the narrative to create a safe space for people to say, well, yeah, I'm autistic too, right? Autistic now means something different to a lot of people, but it's still very misunderstood by most in the general population.
Let me give a call out now to the listener in Singapore, to the listener in Vatican City, to the listener in Mexico, to the listener in the northern parts of Europe, to the many listeners across the African continent, to people in North America, obviously all of the English-speaking parts of the world. Let me give a call out to you. There are others. There is a network. There are plenty of other resources to network into. Use the people you hear on Autistic Radio to give you a key in to other people for those connections, and then follow and find their network. We might just be the door to you, but it's a real pleasure that you have allowed us into your ears today. Karen, I hope that there will be an opportunity to speak to you again at another juncture.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that will be possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And like you've just said, I am always open to collaborations and communications, but I'm also, very much geared to amplifying the voices. And so I would definitely encourage people to, definitely follow the work that you and I are doing, to also check out the partners, the collaborations. I founded the Neurodivergent Infinity Network of Educators. We have a growing number of partners all over the world, and we draw upon each other, right? Their podcasts and their educational events, publications. It's really brilliant to see what's happening all around. I encourage people to check out those resources.
Name it again, Karen. Name it again.
So it's NINE, the Neurodivergent Infinity Network of Educators.
The program notes, everything will be there for you. Every social media link for the network there in the link, something for you to click on so that you can find your place out there alongside with all of the rest of us bound together twigs that make a really strong trunk. Thank you for listening today, and especially thank you to Karen Timm.
It's been a pleasure chatting, always open to the dialogue. What I like to say is ripples become waves, and this is one more ripple that we're sending out there. So let's become those waves.
Autistic Radio is about us, it's for us, and it's from us. Autistic Radio is about you, it's for you, and it can be from you. We have every single Sunday drop-in, 4:44 PM every Sunday. That's not live, that's us getting together, us talking, community. Every Sunday, Harry leads a 5:55 PM, a discussion around the Facebook page that he creates. Involve yourself by suggesting what we should talk about next. Share it with Harry. And then the bigger picture. Advocate. Use us. Speak to the world. Your project, your idea, your enthusiasm. We have a whole range of different programs that will fit what you want. As far as listening goes, there's some challenging stuff out there. Because amongst the identity, the entertainment, and the community, we also make serious programs with autism professionals, challenging their ideas and bringing what you say in other spaces to them. A lot of those are difficult listens, but it's a holistic gathering. It comes all together. Autistic Radio is very varied. We need a favour. To encourage us, we need you to share us. When you share us, you give autistic people power. When you share us, you make us impossible to ignore. When you repost on LinkedIn and Facebook and anywhere else, you're advocating for everybody in the autistic community. So pick the things that you're happy with and get them out there. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you from all of us.